Welcome back to Retro Laws. Today, we're going to be looking at the history of a brilliant studio that dared to dream too big. It is a story about how a corporate giant took a wild garden of creativity and paved it over. Chapter 1: The Sandbox Genesis. The story of the greatest simulation studio starts with a strange realization about human play. In the middle of the 1980s, a young programmer named Will Wright was working hard. He was designing an action game called Raid on Bungeling Bay for the Commodore 64. The main goal of this game was to fly a helicopter and bomb enemy factories. The game was fast, loud, and followed the standard rules of old arcade experiences. However, Will Wright discovered something very unusual while coding his helicopter action game. He spent months using a custom software program to design the complex island maps. He realized he was having much more fun building the islands than bombing them. The act of placing tiny roads, factories, and harbors felt deeply satisfying to his mind. He would sit for hours tweaking the layout of his fictional cities on screen. He began to wonder if other people would enjoy this creative process too. This simple thought challenged the core identity of the early video game industry. Most publishers in the 1980s believed that games required high scores and final bosses. They thought players only wanted to test their quick reflexes against digital threats. Will Wright wanted to build something entirely different from the traditional arcade mold. He wanted to create an interactive canvas where players could set their own goals. He called his new design philosophy a digital toy rather than a game. A toy does not tell you when you lose or win your match. A toy simply responds to your choices and allows you to explore freely. Will Wright spent his nights coding a complex system based on urban planning theories. He read heavy academic books about system dynamics and how real cities grow over time. He translated these complicated mathematical models into simple lines of computer code. The system calculated housing demands, traffic congestion, and industrial pollution levels in real time. Every single element in the simulation affected every other element across the grid. If you raised taxes too high, your digital citizens would pack up and leave. If you neglected your power plants, dark blackouts would freeze your local economy. It was a beautiful living ecosystem made of glowing green and blue pixels. Unfortunately, the established video game industry did not share his grand creative vision. Will Wright took his prototype, then named Micropolis, to every major software publisher. The corporate executives looked at the quiet screen and scratched their heads in confusion. They asked where the main villain was hiding in the simulation. They wondered how a player could win a game that never actually ended. Every single publisher turned down the project because they feared it would fail. They believed nobody would pay money to manage a municipal budget on weekends. The project languished in mid-development until Will Wright attended a casual pizza party in 1987. There he met an optimistic businessman named Jeff Braun who wanted to enter gaming. Jeff Braun saw the immense hidden potential in Wright's bizarre city simulation prototype. He recognized that personal computer owners were growing older and wanted smarter entertainment. The two men decided to form their own independent company to release it. They chose the name Maxis because it sounded professional, clean, and forward-thinking. They officially released the game as SimCity in the year 1989 for home computers. The launch started slowly because they lacked a massive advertising budget for stores. However, a wave of glowing word-of-mouth reviews began to spread across early internet forums. Teachers, parents, and older gamers fell deeply in love with the urban playground. The game became an overnight sensation and flooded retail stores with massive consumer demand. Maxis had successfully created a brand new genre of software out of thin air. The massive financial success of SimCity transformed Maxis from a two-man operation into a studio. The office filled with eccentric programmers, artists, and unconventional design. Will Wright fostered an environment that felt more like a university laboratory than a business. The team spent their time researching chaotic systems, biological evolution, and animal behavior patterns. They wanted to see what else they could turn into a grand simulation. They did not care about chasing industry trends or copying popular action titles. They wanted to simulate the entire natural universe using personal computer hardware. This wild curiosity led to a golden era of experimental sandbox software design. In 1990, the studio launched SimEarth, which let players manage a whole planet's climate. You could spark global volcanic eruptions or watch single-celled organisms crawl onto land. 1 year later, they released SimAnt, a simulation inspired by real backyard ant colonies. Players managed chemical trails, fought off rival red ants, and dodged giant lawnmowers. The game combined rigorous scientific accuracy with a whimsical sense of humor. Maxis games always treated the player as an intelligent, curious co-creator of the story. The studio's signature aesthetic became instantly recognizable to PC gamers around the world. The games featured clean, isometric perspectives, intricate menus, and iconic sound design elements. Players loved the satisfying click of a mouse button placing a new zone down. They cheered when the game engine generated a tiny, perfectly rendered digital world. Maxis boxes stood out on store shelves with their bold fonts and strange artwork. The studio proved that intellectual curiosity could be incredibly profitable in mainstream entertainment. By the release of SimCity 2000 in 1993, Maxis reached its absolute creative peak. The sequel added glorious three-dimensional hills, underground water pipes, and beautiful futuristic archaeology. The simulation engine ran deeper and handled thousands of daily calculations without crashing. It became a permanent cultural touchstone for a whole generation of bright kids. Real-world mayors and urban planners cited the game as their primary career inspiration. The studio seemed completely unstoppable as they defined the golden age of PC gaming. However, this rapid growth created hidden structural pressures beneath the surface of the studio. The massive success of their core city simulators hid some major financial problems. Maxis tried to expand their simulation branding to every topic imaginable during the 90s. They released experimental titles like Simcopter, SimRefinery, and even a strange game called SimIsle. Many of these projects were rushed out to capitalize on the valuable Maxis name. They often suffered from clunky user interfaces, severe software bugs, and poor sales numbers. The studio grew too quickly and began losing its tight central creative focus. Wall Street investors started watching the company after Maxis went public in 1995. The casual, chaotic laboratory environment clashed hard with quarterly financial profit expectations. Corporate managers pushed the developers to release games before they were fully finished. The free-form magic of the kitchen table revolution was starting to fade away. The stage was set for a massive corporate predator to enter the picture. Chapter 2: The Corporate Handshake. The bright, colorful dream of the sandbox empire began to rot from the inside out. By the final months of 1996, the brilliant developers at Maxis faced a terrifying financial reality. The company had grown too massive, too fast, and without a clear economic compass. Their initial public stock offering turned out to be a golden cage for the studio. Wall Street investors did not care about biological systems or complex mathematical theories of ant behavior. They cared about steady, predictable profits that looked good on quarterly corporate financial reports. The experimental laboratory environment was suddenly forced to compete in a hyper-aggressive retail video game market. To satisfy these new corporate masters, the studio rushed out several deeply flawed games. They launched a series of weak spin-offs that stained their premium brand name. A major disaster arrived in stores under the title of Streets of SimCity. The game promised to let players drive through their own custom city maps in full 3D. However, the technology of the mid-90s simply could not handle that ambitious crossover vision. The final product was a completely broken, unplayable mess filled with ugly, jagged polygons. Cars floated randomly through the sky, textures vanished instantly, and the game crashed constantly. At the exact same time, their flight simulation title Simcopter suffered a massive public scandal. A disgruntled programmer hid unauthorized code deep inside the game's rendering files. On specific calendar dates, the game generated dozens of shirtless men kissing each other in the streets. The mainstream media noticed the hidden Easter egg, creating an immediate public relations emergency. Maxis had to recall thousands of game discs from retail shelves at immense financial cost. These combined high-profile failures caused the company's financial health to plummet into a dangerous tailspin. Their soaring stock price crashed down from $50 to a miserable $11 per share. The proud, independent studio was rapidly bleeding cash and running out of viable business options. They were trapped in a classic corporate corner with no exit strategy in sight. That was the precise moment when Electronic Arts decided to make its aggressive move. Electronic Arts was rapidly transforming into the single most dominant publisher in the entire industry. Under the strict leadership of Larry Probst, the company operated with cold, military efficiency. They viewed video games as a highly standardized consumer product, much like sports equipment. They wanted to eliminate financial unpredictability by acquiring independent studios and standardizing their production pipeline. Maxis possessed world-class brand recognition, but lacked the discipline to run a profitable business model. To the ruthless executives at EA, it looked like a perfect target for acquisition. In the summer of 1997, Electronic Arts officially purchased Maxis for $125 million in stock. To the gaming press, the massive buyout was framed as a grand alliance of talent. Executives promised that EA would provide the financial security Maxis needed to create great art. They claimed the original creative spirit of the sandbox studio would remain completely untouched. However, the actual developers working at the desks knew the harsh truth immediately. The wild, experimental era of personal computer software design was officially coming to an end. The cultural shock hit the Walnut Creek studio offices like a sudden physical impact. The casual, chaotic paradise of eccentric programmers was systematically dismantled by the new owners. Groups of serious suits and corporate managers began walking through the design floors every morning. They brought thick binders filled with marketing data, rigid milestones, and tight production timetables. Every creative idea now had to be justified to a committee focused on budgets. The old days of arguing about natural science over greasy pizza boxes were completely gone. The first major battleground of this new corporate regime was the production of SimCity 3000. Before the big buyout, the original Maxis team was trying to build a revolution. They wanted the next city simulator to feature a fully three-dimensional graphic engine. They spent a year building a prototype that let players rotate the camera completely. However, the software tools of 1997 were far too primitive for that scale. The 3D graphics looked incredibly brown, muddy, and lacked the charm of the older games. The project was hopelessly stuck in a dark loop of development hell for months. The game ran at a cinematic single-digit frame rate on standard home computers. The developers were completely paralyzed by their own grand, unachievable design goals. They refused to admit that their dream engine was a total failure for the market. That was when the new corporate managers from Electronic Arts stepped in with authority. They looked at the broken 3D project and ordered the team to scrap it completely. They forced the stubborn developers to return to traditional two-dimensional isometric pixel graphics. The corporate logic was simple, direct, and completely focused on the mainstream consumer market. They knew a clean 2D game would run smoothly on regular family desktop computers. They demanded the developers stop experimenting with broken code and deliver a working product. The studio veterans were absolutely furious about this heavy-handed corporate interference in their art. They felt that the cold suits were killing the progressive future of simulation design. They believed the publisher was forcing them backward into the past just to make a quick buck. Yet this harsh corporate intervention produced a truly fascinating historical paradox for the team. When SimCity 3000 finally launched in early 1999, it became a massive commercial triumph. The game was an absolute masterpiece of traditional isometric art design and systemic depth. The virtual cities felt incredibly alive, bright, and packed with wonderful visual micro-details. Tiny animated pedestrians walked along sidewalks, traffic flowed realistically, and jazz music played in the background. The game sold millions of copies worldwide and completely restored the financial reputation of the studio. This immense success created a strange, quiet shift in the psychological mindset of the developers. They had to admit that corporate discipline had saved them from total bankruptcy. The old, independent ethos of long, endless experimentation started to look like an expensive mistake. A new generation of workers entered the studio who were raised on corporate structure. They learned that following strict schedules was the safest path to a stable career. The radical, anti-establishment culture of the original sandbox pioneers was slowly beginning to dry up. Amidst this massive corporate transition, Will Wright found himself in a very strange position. He was the undisputed creative genius who gave the entire company its initial value. Electronic Arts knew they could not treat him like a regular entry-level programmer. They gave him a unique, insulated space within the corporate hierarchy to explore new concepts. While the rest of the studio focused on safe sequels, Wright was left alone to daydream. He spent his time thinking about a bizarre project that most executives found completely absurd. The original co-founder of Maxis, Jeff Braun, chose to leave the company shortly after the acquisition. He saw the writing on the wall and realized the independent era was finished. The management team was systematically replaced by seasoned industry veterans who excelled at corporate metrics. Every single department was rewired to align perfectly with Electronic Arts' global distribution engine. The studio had successfully survived its dangerous financial collapse, but the price was incredibly high. The chaotic creative spark had been traded for a smooth, predictable, and highly profitable corporate assembly line. The digital sandbox was no longer a wild, free playground for rogue software artists. It was now a premium corporate asset that needed to generate massive revenue every single quarter. Chapter 3: The Golden Goose and the Infinite Sequel. The financial salvation of the Maxis studio did not come from building massive concrete metropolises. It came from a deeply personal tragedy that occurred in Will Wright's private life. In the year 1991, a terrible firestorm swept through the dry hills of Oakland, California. The roaring flames completely destroyed Will Wright's family home, along with all his earthly possessions. He was forced to rebuild his entire life manually from the ground up. He spent months choosing new pieces of furniture, buying basic kitchen utensils, and replacing clothes. This exhausting process made him look closely at the deep relationship between people and material objects. He began to wonder if a simulator could capture the microscopic details of daily human existence. He wanted to build an interactive virtual dollhouse that modeled human psychology and social behaviors. He called his early design concept Project X, keeping it hidden from the rest of the company. When he finally presented the idea to the Maxis board, they laughed at him. The internal marketing teams completely hated the project and thought it was a terrible idea. They told him that young male video gamers would never play a digital dollhouse game. They believed the concept was way too mundane to compete with flashy action titles. The project was explicitly denied funding and was quietly put on a distant back burner. The Electronic Arts buyout unexpectedly gave Will Wright the perfect political leverage he desperately needed. The new corporate managers were desperate for a massive, groundbreaking hit to justify their expensive purchase. They looked at Wright's unique dollhouse concept and saw an untapped mainstream consumer demographic. They decided to greenlight the game, officially naming the ambitious simulation project The Sims. The developers spent years coding complex, autonomous artificial intelligence routines for the digital characters. They created a fictional language called Simlish, so players would focus entirely on physical actions. The simulation engine tracked 8 core basic human needs, including hunger, energy, and social interaction. If a character spent too much time alone, their mood meter would drop into dangerous levels. If they did not practice their cooking skills, they would accidentally burn down their kitchen. It was an incredibly addictive loop of micromanagement that perfectly captured the human condition. When The Sims finally launched in February of the year 2000, history repeated itself. The game did not just become a standard commercial success for the publisher. It exploded into an absolute global cultural phenomenon that completely shattered every industry. It rapidly became the best-selling PC game of all time, appealing to millions of non-traditional gamers. For the first time, young women and older adults were spending hours playing video games. The game crossed over into mainstream pop culture media and transformed Maxis into a massive powerhouse. Electronic Arts realized they were sitting directly on top of a massive financial goldmine. The corporate executives instantly shifted their long-term strategic focus to exploit this incredibly valuable. They noticed that fans were completely obsessed with buying new virtual items for their homes. The publisher pioneered a highly aggressive business model based on an endless stream of expansions. They began releasing secondary software discs every few months to expand the base game. The first major expansion pack arrived in retail stores under the title Live in Large. It added quirky, supernatural elements like spooky haunted lamps, magic potions, and the Grim Reaper. Players happily rushed out to department stores to buy the newest physical cardboard boxes. Maxis rapidly followed this success with Hot Date, Vacation Unleashed, and several other themed expansions. The studio became an efficient assembly line dedicated entirely to churning out new consumer content. This massive business triumph created a profound structural trap for the creative health of Maxis. The studio was completely swamped by the sheer scale of managing a massive franchise. The best programmers and artists were systematically moved off experimental projects to work on sequels. They spent years designing digital hot tubs, virtual clothing styles, and cute pet animations. The wild, free-thinking atmosphere of the original independent studio was completely replaced by production quotas. The developers were caught in an infinite loop of creating superficial cosmetic content additions. The financial numbers were incredibly beautiful, but the creative spirit was slowly running dry. The studio was no longer allowed to take big risks on strange new ideas. Every single project had to fit neatly into the highly profitable framework of the franchise. The corporate managers monitored consumer behavior data to design the next seasonal product line. The digital sandbox had successfully transitioned from an intellectual art form into a highly commercialized factory. This predictable corporate routine began to wear down the veteran designers who loved deep simulation. They missed the old days of researching complex systems and natural physics models. They felt like they were working in a digital toy factory rather than a laboratory. Will Wright himself began to grow restless within this rigid corporate architecture. He had achieved total financial independence, but felt creatively restricted by his own massive success. He did not want to spend the rest of his career designing virtual kitchen counters. He began to use his immense corporate power to shield a secret new development team. He wanted to break completely free from the domestic walls of his famous home simulator. He started to sketch out an incredibly massive concept that would dwarf his previous work. He wanted to simulate the entire history of life itself across cosmic timescales. This grand project would eventually lead to the ultimate test of the Maxis creative soul. The studio was about to discover if their original spirit could survive a collision with destiny. Chapter 4: The Spore Prophecy. The intense pressures of managing a single massive franchise began to split the studio. Will Wright felt completely trapped by the endless success of his domestic virtual sandbox. He did not want to spend his life approving virtual couch colors for expansions. He wanted to return to the grand cosmic questions that first inspired his career. He wanted to build a simulator that contained every single level of reality itself. He wanted to look at the universe through a massive scientific telescope. His new secret concept was originally given the epic development name of Sim Everything. He wanted to simulate the absolute entirety of biological evolution over billions of years. The game would begin with a single cell swimming in a colorful primeval soup. It would end with advanced space fleets exploring a massive three-dimensional galaxy of stars. No software developer had ever attempted a digital project on this unbelievable scale. It required entirely new ways of programming art, animation, and artificial intelligence systems. The core technology behind this massive cosmic dream was called procedural generation. Traditional video games required large teams of artists to build every digital model. They had to sculpt every rock, animate every leg, and paint every leaf. Will Wright knew that method would fail on a massive galactic scale. He hired brilliant mathematicians to build systems that generated content using complex mathematical formulas. The software would instantly calculate how a creature should walk based on its legs. If a player gave a monster 10 legs, the game figured out the walk. If they added 5 eyes, the visual tracking system adapted to those eyes. It was an incredibly advanced technical achievement that pushed modern computers to their limits. In the spring of the year 2005, Will Wright officially revealed his project. He stood before a packed audience at the prestigious Game Developers Conference in California. He loaded up a live demonstration of the early prototype, now named Spore. The crowd sat in absolute silence as he demonstrated the magic on screen. He built a strange creature, watched it evolve, and flew it into deep space. The entire presentation felt like a historic glimpse into the ultimate future of entertainment. The global gaming media instantly erupted with an unprecedented wave of massive journalistic hype. Front-cover magazine articles proclaimed that Spore would change the video game industry forever. They praised Will Wright as a lone visionary who was saving games from stagnation. Gamers talked about the infinite possibilities of the project on thousands of internet forums. They planned out the exact species they would create when the game arrived. The immense cultural expectations rose to a level that no real product could match. However, behind the closed doors of the Maxis offices, a war was raging. The development team was deeply fractured into two aggressive, opposing philosophical design factions. The first group of veteran programmers was internally referred to as the science team. They wanted the game to be a rigorous, deeply accurate simulation of nature. They wanted to include real evolutionary concepts like genetic drift and natural selection. They believed the game should feel dangerous, vast, and grounded in hard science. The second group of designers was internally referred to as the cute team. They wanted the game to be highly accessible, charming, and visually adorable. They believed that complex evolutionary mathematics would completely alienate the casual mainstream consumer. They wanted players to feel an emotional connection to their custom creature designs. This deep creative divide poisoned the daily atmosphere of the studio for years. Every single design meeting turned into a fierce argument about the game's identity. Electronic Arts watched this long, expensive internal war with growing corporate panic. The publisher had already poured tens of millions of dollars into the project. The release date had been pushed back multiple times as the years ticked by. The corporate executives were desperate to get a return on their massive investment. They looked at the huge casual audience that bought copies of The Sims. They realized they could make more money if the game appealed to families. The publisher firmly threw its corporate weight behind the philosophy of the cute team. They ordered the developers to simplify the complex mathematical simulation systems immediately. The rigorous scientific mechanics were systematically stripped away to save production time. The deep evolutionary equations were replaced by simple arcade-style minigames for kids. The veteran programmers of the science team felt completely betrayed by this choice. They watched their grand, unified simulation break down into 5 isolated game segments. When Spore finally launched in September of the year 2008, the cracks were obvious. The brilliant procedural generation tools worked beautifully, allowing players to build anything. The Creature Creator tool became an instant viral sensation across the early internet. Millions of bizarre creative monsters were uploaded to the global server network overnight. Yet, the actual game beneath the creative tools felt incredibly shallow and hollow. The unified grand journey of life turned out to be 5 separate games. The Cell stage felt like a simple clone of classic arcade titles. The Creature stage was a repetitive loop of singing or biting other monsters. The Tribal and Civilization stages were incredibly basic strategy systems with no real depth. The final Space stage felt like an exhausting chore of micromanaging planetary colonies. The deep simulation that fans were promised for 3 years had completely vanished. The critical reviews were polite, but the core community felt profoundly disappointed by it. The commercial situation grew much worse due to a massive public relations disaster. Electronic Arts decided to protect the game using an incredibly strict digital rights management software. The hidden software program was called SecuROM, and it installed deep within Windows systems. It strictly limited customers to only 3 total installations of their purchased game. If a player bought a new computer, they had to call customer service. This aggressive anti-piracy measure triggered an absolute firestorm of consumer rage online. Furious customers felt they were being treated like common criminals by the publisher. They aggressively boycotted the game and flooded retail websites with thousands of single-star reviews. Spore rapidly became the single most pirated video game in the entire world. Millions of players downloaded cracked copies simply to avoid the corporate safety software. The highly anticipated salvation of the simulation genre had transformed into a disaster. The ultimate tragedy of the project was the profound psychological toll it took on the studio. The creative heart of Maxis was completely broken by the compromise of their dream. Will Wright realized that his original independent philosophy could no longer survive here. The massive corporate machinery of Electronic Arts had warped his grandest cosmic concept. He had spent 8 long years fighting committees, marketers, and executive managers. He felt completely exhausted by the endless corporate friction of the modern industry. In April of the year 2009, Will Wright officially resigned from Maxis forever. He walked out the door of the company he had co-founded 2 decades earlier. His departure was a massive, devastating psychological blow to the remaining studio staff. He was the grandfather of the sandbox, the creative compass of the entire team. Without his unique guidance, the studio lost its protective shield against corporate mandates. They were now just another internal developer asset owned by a giant global publisher. The prophetic dream of simulating everything had officially ended in a quiet corporate surrender. Chapter 5: The Glassbox Catastrophe. The total departure of Will Wright left a massive, silent void inside the studio walls. The remaining developers were suddenly floating in a cold corporate sea without their original compass. They felt a deep, pressing need to prove they could still create pure sandbox magic. The studio heads decided to return to the legendary franchise that built their entire empire. They began working on a brand new, modern version of SimCity for a new generation. The eager design team wanted this project to be the ultimate city-building simulation. They spent years constructing a beautiful new software program called the Glassbox Engine. The original games always used hidden mathematical charts to guess the growth of a city. This new engine promised to simulate every single individual citizen in real time. The developers proudly called these tiny, living pieces of data individual simulation agents. A single agent could be a worker, a bucket of water, or electricity. The early promotional videos for the game looked absolutely spectacular to the public. Players watched tiny, perfect power lines glow as digital electricity flowed through the streets. They saw miniature garbage trucks driving around corners to pick up small trash cans. The entire world felt incredibly real, responsive, and packed with wonderful visual detail. The simulation genre seemed ready to take a massive leap into the modern era. However, the corporate masters at Electronic Arts had a very different strategic agenda. The gaming industry was rapidly shifting toward constant internet connectivity and social features. The publisher demanded that the new SimCity must operate as an always online game. They wanted players to build interconnected regions alongside their real-world friends. The corporate executives claimed that home computers could not handle the heavy simulation math. They insisted that large corporate servers in the cloud had to do the work. This single corporate mandate created a massive structural trap for the developers. The Glassbox engine was highly complex, fragile, and required immense processing power. The programmers quickly realized the simulation calculations could not scale up to massive sizes. The system would slow down to a crawl if a city grew too big. To prevent the software from breaking, they made shocking compromises to the design. The developers strictly limited the physical boundaries of every single player city. Each custom map was compressed down to a tiny 2-kilometer square plot. This small space was roughly the size of a minor suburban neighborhood. Longtime fans were used to building massive, sprawling metropolises that covered miles of land. Now, they were suddenly forced to build tiny towns surrounded by empty green fields. The grand, endless sandbox playground had been transformed into a series of small cages. The fateful launch day finally arrived in the chilly month of March 2013. Millions of excited gamers eagerly purchased their digital copies and tried to log in. That was the exact moment when the entire digital empire collapsed into ruin. The corporate servers could not handle the massive wave of eager players. The global authentication network instantly crashed under the immense consumer strain. Gamers sat at their desks staring at cold, blank loading screens for hours. They were blocked by cryptic error messages that told them the servers were busy. People could not even play a quiet single-player game by themselves. The mandatory online connection locked paying customers completely out of their $60 purchase. It was one of the most disastrous, broken launches in video game history. The public backlash across the internet was swift, fierce, and completely unstoppable. Angry players flooded retail sites with thousands of terrible one-star consumer reviews. Major gaming magazines stripped away their high praise and lowered their final scores. Major retail stores started pulling the physical game boxes off their display shelves. Electronic Arts scrambled to add more servers, but the public damage was done. The true horror began when the servers finally stayed online for a few days. Players finally got the chance to look closely at the underlying simulation mechanics. They quickly discovered that the highly praised Glassbox engine was completely fake. The sophisticated artificial intelligence routines turned out to be incredibly simple and broken. The tiny simulation agents did not possess permanent homes or real daily jobs. Every single morning, digital citizens left their houses and drove toward the closest job. They did not care if the workplace belonged to an entirely different person. In the evening, they simply drove into the nearest empty house to sleep. The pathfinding software was so primitive that vehicles always took the shortest physical path. Thousands of cars would herd onto a single narrow dirt road like mindless sheep. Sprawling 6-lane avenues sat completely empty while the back alleys were totally gridlocked. The basic utilities like water and sewage suffered from the exact same design flaws. Power agents wandered aimlessly through the street grids with no actual destination. Whole neighborhoods would lose electricity while power plants had massive amounts of excess energy. Fire trucks would form long single-file lines to extinguish the exact same house fire. The beautiful illusion of a living, breathing city had completely dissolved into comedy. Intrepid computer programmers quickly examined the internal code of the game files. They discovered that the game could actually run offline without any server help. The publisher's claim about cloud computing turned out to be a massive corporate lie. The community felt deeply insulted, manipulated, and completely betrayed by the company. The proud name of Maxis had become an industry punchline for corporate greed. The developers worked tirelessly for months to patch the broken pathfinding systems. They eventually added an official offline mode, but it was far too late. The loyal player community had already abandoned the game out of deep frustration. They moved on to fresher, independent city builders that offered large open spaces. The financial returns for the expensive project fell far below corporate expectations. The final devastating corporate hammer blow fell on a quiet Wednesday afternoon. On March 4th, the year 2015, Electronic Arts made a sudden public announcement. They officially closed down the historic Maxis Emeryville studio forever. The main branch that built SimCity, Spore, and the sandbox genre was dead. The remaining projects were moved to distant corporate satellite offices across the globe. The employees quietly packed up their desks and walked out into the California sun. They left behind empty whiteboards filled with old sketches of virtual worlds. The unique culture that began at a casual pizza party was completely gone. The corporate machine had successfully extracted billions of dollars from the digital sandbox. In the process, they had completely choked out the artistic soul of the studio. The tragic story of Maxis remains a powerful warning sign for the gaming industry. It shows what happens when corporate metrics completely conquer wild artistic curiosity. A great simulation requires room to grow, room to fail, and room to experiment. When you pave over the sandbox with rigid structures, you lose the magic. The tiny digital citizens have stopped walking, and the grand toy box is closed forever.